When Richard Nixon won re-election with the biggest landslide in history, the Democrats in Congress and those who ran the media despaired. Nixon won 49 out of 50 states, which no other candidate had accomplished ever before, and only Ronald Reagan has accomplished since. Yet the reasons for his popularity were clear. In Lyndon Johnson's final year in office, more than 16,000 American soldiers were killed in Vietnam. In Nixon's first year in the White House, that number shrank to 9,000, and in his second year, it dropped to 6,000. The nation's economy improved nicely too, and Nixon's skill at foreign relations dazzled world leaders. Ping-pong diplomacy was born in April 1971, when U.S. players were approved to travel to China. Other meetings were arranged, and eventually Nixon himself flew to China to meet with Mao in February 1972. The economic benefits of opening the door to communist China were massive for the Chinese and American peoples. Trillions and trillions of dollars in payments and goods have been generated through opening that trade route. After he was re-elected, he ended the military draft and also forced North Vietnam to negotiate a treaty. After a treaty was signed, Secretary of State Henry Kissinger won the Nobel Peace Prize, and the Democrats stewed in their resentment. As with dogs and cats, the Democrats and Republicans hate each other, and the Dems hate a successful Republican most of all. The first successful Republican was shot in the back of the head by an angry Democrat. In another part of Washington, other news was happening. In May of 1972, J. Edgar Hoover died. As soon as Mark Felt, Hoover's longtime lieutenant, learned that his boss was gone, he oversaw what may have been the biggest cover-up of illegal and immoral activities in the history of Washington. For decades, Hoover spied on private citizens and political leaders whom he believed were his enemies. Without getting a court order or accusing these targets of any crime, Hoover had his agents spy on them, tap their phone lines, photograph them, and bug their motel rooms to collect any embarrassing information that he could. In some cases, Hoover leaked the details to the newspapers, and in other cases, he blackmailed the victims. Distrusting the civil rights movement of the 1960s, Hoover had his agents collect photographs and motel recordings of Martin Luther King and various women and sent copies to King's wife. Another prominent example involved Lyndon Johnson. In 1964, just days before Hoover testified in the early stages of the Warren Commission hearings on the Kennedy assassination, President Lyndon Johnson waived the mandatory federal government retirement age of 70, permitting Hoover to continue as the FBI director for an indefinite period of time. What pressure did Hoover use to get what he wanted? If anyone had skeletons in his closet, actual skeletons, it was Johnson. Johnson might not have invented dirty politics, but he certainly excelled at it. The Dems canalizing Felt as an idealistic whistleblower who exposed a cover-up is especially absurd when considering the enormous cover-up of illegal and unethical operations at the FBI, as Felt and his team of insiders destroyed boxes and boxes of files. In comparison, Nixon was accused of erasing only 18.5 minutes of audio recording of a conversation that took place in his own office. And the horrible crime that they talked about was Liddy's Class 3 burglary. When it comes to covering up crimes, Felt is the true champ, and Nixon simply can't match him. Felt and his accomplices at the FBI destroyed all the boxes of secret files detailing Hoover's and Felt's illegal activities and personal vendettas in order to protect Felt and other agents from prosecution, as well as to safeguard Hoover's reputation. Felt thought quite highly of himself and was certain that he would be appointed as the new director of the FBI as long as there were no nasty records left to be uncovered. He had worked in the bureau for many years. He had risen to the position of assistant director, and he knew the culture of the bureau. Hoover trusted Felt more than anyone else because Felt had always been completely loyal to Hoover, done any vile job that Hoover wanted him to do, shared the same views, and hated the same people. However, Nixon, like other Washington insiders, knew too much about Hoover, his lieutenants, and the unethical activities of the Bureau, and therefore decided to clean out the rat's nest once and for all. To this end, he appointed an outsider, Patrick Gray, who was the Assistant Attorney General, to be the new director. Several members of Felt's team of insiders were reassigned to various cities across the country. Later, when it became public that Gray had destroyed a file given to him by John Dean, Gray had to resign. Again, Felt hoped to become director, but Nixon, who knew that Felt was not trustworthy, appointed Bill Ruckelshaus instead. Felt believed that he'd been betrayed by Nixon. Who was Nixon to break up the power structure at the FBI or to disperse the loyal insiders? Felt determined to get revenge on the boss who had passed him over for promotion. The media and liberal history professors portray Felt as a whistleblower who was motivated by idealistic values. But when was Felt ever idealistic? He was motivated by revenge. Simple revenge, on a very personal level. In 1980, the idealistic Felt was tried for violating the civil rights of people linked with the Weatherman organization when he ordered the FBI agents to illegally search their homes without bothering to get a search warrant. This was not the first time that Felt ignored the law. The jury had no difficulty in finding Felt guilty of all charges. However, the convicted criminal never spent a day in prison, and in 1981, he received a presidential pardon from Republican Ronald Reagan. In the end, the former Democratic legislative aside, who later betrayed his oath and legal responsibilities to inflict as much damage as he could on the Republican Party, was pardoned by a Republican president. History is filled with ironies. Even more astonishing, on October 29, 1980, former President Nixon appeared at Felt's trial as a rebuttal witness for the defense, and Nixon even gave money to Felt's defense fund. Had Felt and his accomplices not destroyed all those files in 1972, he would never have escaped prison. At his criminal trial in 1980, Felt also admitted approving a black bag job against the Arab Information Center in Dallas, 1972, which sounds much like the Watergate break-in. The prosecutor said Felt was responsible for violation of the rights of all people of this country, violations that cannot and will not be tolerated as long as we have a Bill of Rights. Felt also targeted Jennifer Dawn, whose sister Bernadine was a leader of the Weather Underground. In an interview with Amy Goodman on Democracy Now!, Dawn talked about extensive harassment, ranging from wiretaps to constant surveillance to the FBI visiting her employer in an effort to get her fired, and that's just what she knew at the time. When she received through the Freedom of Information Act the many documents the FBI had on her, Dawn discovered a much more alarming tactic. The FBI had discussed the possibility of kidnapping her infant son in order to convince her sister to turn herself in. Dawn filed a civil suit against Mark Felt and Miller in 1978, which was settled out of court in 1983 for an undisclosed amount, although she said it was basically lawyers' fees. Felt took an oath when he joined the FBI, but he broke that oath time and again, including when he told Washington Post writer Bob Woodward about the FBI surveillances and interviews. Felt had leaked information to Woodward before. Usually, FBI investigations must be kept confidential. Also, federal law prohibits newspapers from publishing classified information under Title 18 of the U.S. Code, Section 798, Disclosure of Classified Information. In Snep v. United States, 1980, the court commentated further on the question of prior restraint and classified documents, holding that the First Amendment does not override an employee employer agreement requiring that a former CIA officer wanting to publish information concerning his activities clear the material with the agency before publication. When Felt leaked secret information about an FBI investigation to the Washington Post, he was not only breaking his oath as an employee of the Bureau, he was committing a crime. And when Woodward published the FBI report, which he knew was confidential and supplied to him surreptitiously, he knew he too was defying the FBI and the courts. Furthermore, the secret meetings and the agreements to publish the confidential FBI report constituted a conspiracy. Clearly, the media and other Democrats don't hate all criminals. In fact, they celebrate some criminals.